Dawn?
Serious.
All right, guys, thank y'all for coming. So today, the target is on the board. I will be able to use formative assessments to draw as a driver for instruction. So I know a lot of times we informally...
Danny Budenhagen, please come to room 101. Danny Budenhagen, please come to room 101.
I know a lot of times we think that we're formatively assessing, or we think that we're summatively assessing, but we really don't use a lot of times that as a driver for instruction. So if you're going to give an exit or an interest ticket, what are you going to do with that information? How are you then going to differentiate according to the rest of grabbing that data? So here we go. So take out your phone or your iPad.
And we can, they don't need to, we can do it together if you want.
Okay, so we'll give you about 30 seconds. Think about something, when we say formative assessments, what comes to mind? Just words, so not phrases, just a word.
Before a check.
Before. Yeah. Check.
Pre.
Pre.
Ongoing.
Periodic. Periodic. Ongoing.
Very.
Don't forget periodic, that was a good one.
Yes. Not punitive.
Not punitive.
Knowledge. You're checking for knowledge.
Understanding. Punitive less.
Periodic.
Punitive?
We've heard periodic 5 times. That should be the biggest word on here. Anything else for formative assessments?
About understanding.
Understanding.
I think that was, yeah.
So we'll come back to this at the end and see if y'all want to add anything else to it. But this is, I think, a good starting point at least. Yeah. All right. I know. I'm going to be out tomorrow for that conference, so I've got a lot of things up. All right. Next slide. So here's our goals. As stated before, the formative assessments. This is one. So remember, we got this a couple years ago. I think last year when Spence took over and we had the little wheel. So this is one of the big ones for planning, assessing, and teaching. So taking all of those different goals and kind of putting them into one. Another big thing that we're talking about is how to differentiate accordingly after grabbing all of that data and going forth. And then applying new strategies and insight into the classroom lessons. So I think people are doing a lot of formative assessments. They're just not really doing much with it afterwards. So they know, like my kids don't know how to solve one-step equations. Well, okay, now what are you going to do now that you know that? So I know a lot of us have been to conferences with Rick Wormley, and here's a good video that he talks about formative and summative. And I'll actually plug this in.
One of the things that comes up when you get into a differentiated class, let alone one that's standards-based, is you have to begin to weigh formative versus summative assessment. Now, summative assessment is actually anticlimactic. It really refers to post-learning, after all is said and done. So the final declaration, usually there's not a lot of capacity to go back and revise one's efforts and be assessed and accredited anew. But one thing that teachers forget is that something that was intended to be summative, child does poorly for whatever reason, you're allowed to make it a formative assessment. Something that was summative now becomes formative. That's actually okay. It's within your prerogative. But what about formative assessment? Well, of the two, teachers tend to spend the majority of their time designing their summative assessments, as if that was the most important aspect. But really, it's formative assessment. That's the most important aspect. It has the greatest impact on student achievement, on feedback to the teacher, everything. The whole enterprise of teaching and learning really boils down to that formative assessment. Can kids learn without grades? Yeah. Can they learn without formative assessment and the feedback that comes from it? Not at all. So we want to emphasize that. In fact, I would suggest that teachers spend at least the same amount of time, if not more, designing formative assessment instead of summative assessment. But what is this formative assessment? Well, formative assessment obviously is the ongoing assessment. It's the checkpoints along the way. But here's the kicker. The best formative assessment actually involves descriptive feedback. Not just, hey, thank you for finishing on time. No, it was you had your supplies, you were able to do this and this and this, and that helps all of us. It's kind of like a Jim Fay in his Love and Logic books, Point and Describe. National Association of Secondary School Principals and many other folks who are into assessment talk about three aspects of descriptive feedback. You help the kid discover, or you point it out yourself, what was the goal, what was the original intent, the objective, where are you in relation to it, and what are we going to do to close that gap? Three different parts of good descriptive feedback. When a kid can take that and use it, we find that formative assessment is any assessment that's done where the kid is allowed to revise his efforts in light of that feedback and then be assessed and accredited anew. Perhaps there's some relearning in there as well, but it's ongoing, and that's the focus. If our focus is summative assessment, students don't learn as well. Dylan William, one of the great researchers in this, he did this wonderful manifesto, Inside the Black Box, with Paul Black. And man, it turned America on its ear. In 1998, we started looking at formative assessment instead of transforming schools. So how do we give feedback to kids? Is there formative assessment in my lesson plans? In great lessons, I should be able to circle the formal formative assessment and feedback going to students. There's also informal, where you observe, maybe get some feedback right there in the spur of the moment. But I should see lots of checks for understanding and kids getting that feedback. In fact, Bob Marzano and many others talk about the effect size, the impact of some decision. And it turns out the effect is much greater if you do an assessment and there's going to be descriptive feedback. If there's no feedback, it turns out the assessment, the tasks, the assignments don't have much instructional value compared to when there's feedback. So in the same planning breath, as I design my assessment, I'm going to design how will students get feedback on this and how will it inform my lessons. In fact, I should be able to walk down a hallway and stop a teacher cold. They don't know I'm coming. They don't know the question's coming. And say, how did formative assessment inform one of your decisions today or this week with a student, a subset of students, or a class? And the teacher should feel very comfortable. I found out this about these students. I decided to do that. That's one of the big pillars of differentiated instruction. And it turns out classrooms where teachers focus on formative assessment, test scores go up if you use that as an indicator. But really, mastery, student achievement, it all goes up. And again, I wonder, what goes unlearned because the teacher didn't get into, didn't understand, didn't apply formative assessment principles?
All right, if you want to that's why I always have to take it out because the buzz. That makes sense too. So y'all actually said a lot of the buzzwords in there for the word garden. Pre-ongoing was another one I heard him say a couple times. The thing I like about what he was saying is not only is it ongoing, it starts the whole time, but you're using that to see exactly where your students are at all times, right? We know this student is having trouble here. What are we going to do to plan accordingly? So using those as planning devices.
So, of course, we always have to tie it into the district somehow, so we want to focus on the Compass to 2020 and use formative assessments as our driver for instruction. So I won't read this in full, but coming from teaching and learning, from our guidelines, the most important assessment of student learning is conducted by teachers as they observe and evaluate students on an ongoing basis. So we want to make sure that we're constantly revamping and looking at data and trying to reach our kids' mastery. And then from our district, this is in some of our guidelines. Here's the characteristics. So the purpose is to provide ongoing feedback, like you guys said, ongoing. Student involvement, encouraged. Student motivation, intrinsic, mastery-oriented. We always want to be pumping them up. Teacher role to provide immediate, specific feedback. So just like the video said, we don't want to give something and then not know how they can improve. Assessment techniques, informal. There's tons of different ways out there, and we'll go over some different ways today. And then effective learning, strong, positive, and long-lasting. So the purpose of today is to help you guys, if you have any questions about this topic, and provide you guys with some tools that you may be able to use in the future. It's to improve and reflect on us as we go through teaching. It's not only for the kids, but it also helps us reflect on our own professional practice. And it's to improve instruction minute by minute, day by day, is supposedly what formative assessments are used for. And then our central question we're going to look at is how can teachers differentiate formative assessments in the classroom based on the student needs. So we all have different classes, probably different levels of kids, maybe even different levels of core, advanced, or credit bearing. So every kid needs a different, has a different need. So now we're going to kind of break out into some stations. Each of us are going to go through a station roughly 7 to 10 minutes with you guys. So we may need to come a little bit together depending on, Tori starts this out. She's going to look at Nearpod and possible whiteboards. Erin's going to do Achieve 3000 with you guys, and then I'm going to step in with Clicker at the end, and then we'll reconvene back together. Any questions so far, you guys? Okay. Tori?
All right, so I think we started off with y'all are group 1, y'all are station 1 with me, and then y'all are going to start with station 2 with Erin based off the format or the Google form that you sent out. Cool? All right. So everybody go to your left. Or go to your iPad.